Hello, and welcome back to the BCR Dawson sub. This update will cover work undertaken during January 2022, primarily on the sections for Chetwynd Yard and Dawson Creek. These are the sections that I'm hoping to get reinstalled first. One of the tasks to be accomplished underneath these sections was to resecure the Singlet servo controllers and the frog juicers, many of which had come loose. These were originally attached to wood brackets with double-sided tape, and over time that tape dried out and the boards came loose. There is a screw hole in the singlets, but it is below the depth of the bracket. My solution was to have some adapter plates made which could go between the bracket and the boards and extend down to enable the singlets to be secured in place with screws. My friend Renee offered to draw the adapter plates on the computer so that I could get them made on the laser cutter at school. I purchased a sheet of 1/8 inch birch plywood, and the laser cutter was able to cut out the plates with the screw holes. After cleaning up the edges of the adapter plates with a sanding block, the hole was threaded for the number 2 screws. The lower photograph here shows 3 controllers underneath Dawson Creek which have come loose over time. Each servo controller was disconnected and moved out of the way, and the remains of the double-sided tape were removed. To do that, I use a heat gun. The adapter plates were then secured in place on the brackets with yellow glue, and the servo controllers were then reconnected and screwed in place on the adapter plates. This photograph shows the 2 sections for Dawson Creek, which have 24 servo controllers and frog juicers, and they're now all fully secured. And here we see several of the 31 servo controllers and frog juicers underneath Chetwynd Yard, also now fully secured. This was a very successful project. These boards are now properly secured and they're not going to be going anywhere. The next job was to attend to the backdrops. As Chetwynd Yard and Dawson Creek will now be extended to the left by 2 feet, the left end backdrop walls had to be removed. My friend John used an oscillating saw to cut through the masonite backdrops, and here we are removing the end backdrop wall for Chetwynd. And here we're doing the same thing for the left half of Dawson Creek, removing the end backdrop wall. The original backdrop for Chetwynd Yard was 9 inches high, and it extended up to the bottom of the upper deck brackets. I wanted to extend the backdrop up between the brackets to the underside of the upper deck, as was done with all subsequent sections of the layout. This would eliminate the unsightly gap between the top of the Chetwynd backdrop and the underside of the upper deck, and the taller backdrop would also greatly aid photography in the yard. The new taller backdrop would be 12.5 inches high, and it was fabricated from 1/8 inch masonite. A jigsaw was used to cut the profile at the north end and also the notches for the upper deck brackets. This photograph shows the new backdrop sitting in place for a test fit, while the sections for Chetwynd Yard are sitting temporarily in place on their brackets. This was to verify that the notches would clear the upper deck brackets, which they did. Over on the backdrop for the Highway 97 section, the oscillating saw was used to cut an opening for the Fort St. John subdivision to pass through. A plywood block was held against the backdrop to aid in achieving a nice rectangular opening. So in the right-hand photograph, the track on the left is the former end of the Fort St. John subdivision. That track is now going to curve to the right through the opening in the backdrop and then along the wall and eventually through the wall into the adjacent bedroom where Septimus will be relocated. Here we have the 2 sections for Chetwynd Yard sitting in place temporarily on their brackets. This is for the purpose of installing the new backdrop, getting it primed and painted, which we'll come back to later. What I would like to share with you now is the revision to the trackwork, which is all of this here. So this area is known as the industrial lead, and it was taken up back to these turnouts and then relayed from here to the end of the yard. This includes the repair and place track there. We have the shop track at the back, which was used for stabling motive power. We have the industrial lead in the middle, which went all the way down to the Can 4 mill. And here in front we have the BC Hydro lead. Now that served the BC Hydro yard here, and then other customers were sometimes involved in transloading between trucks and freight cars here. A little further down we have the new location of the Imperial Oil Spur. This was a distribution facility for various fuel oils, and this is now in its correct location. And then over here we have the turnouts leading into the 4 tracks for the Can 4 mill. Now if I pull back a little bit, you can see this area here from the end of the layout to the wall is going to be an extension to Chetwynd Yard. The new room is 15 feet long, the old room was 13 feet long, so we're gaining about actually 26 inches of additional space. And what that additional space has allowed me to do is enlarge the mill trackage, include the Imperial Oil Spur in its correct location, and then lengthen the BC Hydro lead, the industrial lead, and the shop tracks. So all of that area is actually now more prototypical than it was before. If we come down a little further, this is the location of my original Imperial Oil Spur. This will now be the spur for the BC Development Corporation, and that's actually where it was. This actually extended for some distance. I'm only able to model a portion of it, but it is in the correct location. Now, as you can imagine, all of this revision to the track work resulted in an equal amount of revision to the wiring underneath, as well as the turnout controls. So we will now look at the underside of the layout and take a look at that work. These photographs of the underside of the left half of Chetwynd Yard show what it looked like after all of the track revisions had been done. All of the required changes to the track bus wiring, auxiliary bus wiring, and turnout controls were tagged with green tape. The wiring work required included connecting new feeders to the track bus, terminating old feeders no longer needed, moving servo controllers, supplying track power to the frog juicers and auxiliary power to the servo controllers, and rearranging the toggle runs from the control panels to the servo controllers. So here we are underneath the left side of Chetwynd Yard, and just to show you some of the wiring revisions that took place. The first task was to take all of the new feeders and tie them into old feeders where possible, and this was to avoid disturbing the track bus. So you can see one example here, and you can see another example here. After that work was done, there were some old feeders that were no longer required, and these were terminated simply by capping them with heat shrink. You can see 2 examples here and here. The remainder of the work had to do with the turnout controls. Each turnout is powered by a servo, which has a frog juicer on the back of the bracket, and a Singlet controller here. The frog juicer requires track power from the track bus, and the Singlet controller requires power from the auxiliary bus, which is 12 volts. So it was a matter of finding the nearest feed available for the track power and the auxiliary power to get those powered back up. The last step of the process was to rearrange the toggle runs, which go from the Singlet controller out to the control panels on the front of the layout. So all that work is now complete, and it's looking a lot tidier under here. Returning to the top side of the layout, we now come to the revisions to the turnout control panels. So for the Imperial Oil Spur there, I'm going to try and get the control panel for that mounted here. I always like to try and get it as close as being in line to the turnout as possible, so I think that's as close as we're going to get. Here is the new control panel mount. It's actually a piece of triangular wood with a hole in it for the switch, and there's the new plate that's going to go on it, and here's the toggle with its lead. So that toggle switch will go into the panel here, and the wire will run underneath the layout back to the Singlet controller and plug in there, and that will allow us to throw the turnout from the fascia. So I just have to get the control panel mount painted green to match the fascia, and then we can get that installed. If we come down to the location of the old Imperial Oil spur, which is now the BC Development Corporation spur, you can see that I have replaced the panel with one that has the correct name. So this was just a simple change out. I had the new panel be the same size as the old one, so it was a very quick switch out. And then over here, we have the new schematic for Chetwynd Yard. This is used by the yardmaster to identify the tracks and to see where the various industries are. So this has been altered to show the new location of the BC Development Corporation spur and the new location of the Imperial Oil spur. The last thing to talk about for the month of January is the new taller backdrop for Chetwynd. Here you can see it has been primed and installed, and we're just working on the joint with the original backdrop down at the far end, after which the entire backdrop can be painted blue. As mentioned earlier in the video, there were two reasons for wanting to replace the backdrop with a taller one. The first was to eliminate the gap between the top of the backdrop and the underside of the upper deck. And the second was to improve photography in Chetwynd Yard. So if we come down to track level, you can see that the new taller backdrop really improves things. We don't have to do quite so much cropping at the top of the photograph anymore. So I've really wanted to fix this for a long time, and the opportunity arose when the layout was to be dismantled and moved. That was the perfect time to try and get this new backdrop installed. So it has been glued to the front of the existing backdrop, and here we see the joint between the two halves of the yard. So what I've done here is I've used a piece of plastic molding, and this ties the two sections of the backdrop together quite nicely at their edges. And this will be painted blue to match the backdrop, so it'll blend right in. And then if we come down to the far end of the yard, we can see the joint with the original backdrop. And this has just received some drywall mud that'll get sanded, maybe another application or two. And at that point, the backdrop can be painted blue. So that does it for the month of January. I hope to be back in February with another update, by which time I hope that the sections for Dawson Creek and Chetwynd and the lighting canopy above can be hung permanently. I would like to thank the following individuals who have kindly helped with various aspects of preparing these layout sections for installation. I hope that you have enjoyed this layout update. During February, I'm hoping to get the new Chetwynd backdrop painted, and these sections can then finally be installed in the layout room. I hope to be back next month with another update. Until then, I invite you to like and subscribe to this channel, and also to visit my website at www.bcrdawsonsub.ca. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace be with you.